So, welcome to the latest episode at Clean at Work. This week we are lucky to have Judy Rees, who was actually my first introduction to clean language. So I've got a lot to be grateful for Judy for. Her and Olaf run a fantastic course. Seems like many years ago now. I don't know how many years ago it was. And that was really where I got excited about clean. So I'm really grateful and thankful for joining us today, Judy.
Good to be here. And it is a long time ago. That I think it's about 4 years ago that Clean Language for Agile Coaches. It might even be 5 years ago. But yes, it was good fun. And it was back in the days when we used to be able to meet each other in rooms.
Yeah, I remember it well. We met in this room and it was a fantastic space. And you did some work and it was, one-on-one. I said, how can we do this in teams? And you went, this is the book and this is who you need to go and see. And that's how I got my relationship with Caitlin Walker after that course.
Oh, that's so cool.
Again, thank you for that connection. It's just bringing all those memories back. So give us a bit about how you got into clean yourself, Judy. So I've just said my story. What's your story?
Well, I first came across Clean Language on an NLP, a Neuro-Linguistic Programming course in, I've been trying to figure this out for a long time, I think 2003. But that was just, have a look at this, isn't it interesting, kind of moments within an NLP course. And when I really connected with clean was when I met Wendy Sullivan at an NLP practice group in Richmond, Surrey, on the outskirts of London. And Wendy was doing a presentation about clean language. And it was all good fun, all interesting stuff. It happened that I was just in the process of being made redundant from my then job as managing editor of Teletext, one of the most profitable media operations in the UK at one time.
What is Teletext? Some people might not know what that is.
Teletext is used to be, it's sort of a precursor to the internet. It was a text service that lived on your television. You pressed certain buttons on your telly and you could find hundreds of pages of information, live updated information, news, sport, racing results, stock prices, all that kind of stuff. And while people imagined that it was created by automatic gnomes, it wasn't. There were actual human journalists writing this stuff.
Wow.
And for a time, I was one of the, well, for quite a long time, I worked there and in various roles. But of course, then along came the internet and Teletext, while we were well placed at one level to move across the internet, we got well confused about how to do it, as so many organizations do when they find themselves in deep change. And the upshot was that Teletext is no longer really a thing. There is still a thing called Teletext Holidays on the internet, but it's no longer the same animal at all. So I was being made redundant. I had no idea what I was going to do next. Wendy was looking for somebody to help her with marketing clean. She was running clean language courses 3 or 4 times a year, and she wanted some help with marketing it. And so she came to me and she said, tell you what, you're at a loose end. Why don't you come on this next course? And it was September. I remember it's September. And she said, come on this course and attend the course for free. And then once you know what it's all about, you can help me to market it. And that was the beginning of this story. Now, of course, clean language resonated deeply for me on a couple of levels, in that it works with metaphor as being the native language of the unconscious mind, the stuff of thought. Now, I'd been aware of the importance of metaphor for a long time. My dad, when I was a teenager, was doing some really interesting research into metaphor. And as a result, I had a lot of exposure to quite advanced thinking about the role of metaphor in thought as a teenager. And as a teenager, I read what was probably the book that inspired David Grove to go deeper into this thing, Metaphors We Live By Lakoff and Johnson. So I'd read that all those years ago. And then as a news journalist, I was a local newspaper reporter before I went to Teletext. I'd always been taught that everyone has a story, everyone has a unique story, and it's up to you to help them to tell it. The challenge isn't that they haven't anything to say. If people haven't anything to say, that's a comment on the quality of your questions, not a comment on them. So those two ideas, when linked with the concept of clean language, obviously I went, oh yeah, I can do that. And it was an instant fit for me. From what then happened was that Wendy's assistant went off long-term sick. While I was still looking about me for something useful to do, I ended up assisting her, and then the rest is history.
Wow.
So like you were in the right place at the right time with the right background, and it just wove together.
It wove together. It wasn't one of those, oh, I must go and find myself a clean language trainer to assist. Because that will be my destiny unfolding in front of me. No, it was much more accidental than that.
Right, and you actually met David Grove a few times, is that right?
Yes. So in that early period while I was working with Wendy, one of the things she asked me to do was interview David to promote a course that he was going to do. He'd agreed. David Grove, you've probably heard him described as all sorts of things, a loose cannon, perhaps. But for whatever reason, Wendy managed to persuade him that he would do a course, a 2-day training under Wendy's banner. The Wendy's company is called the Small Change Company. Let's not get into the metaphors behind that. But Wendy persuaded David to do a 2-day training under her banner. And as a way of selling places on that course, she said, why don't you interview David? And we'll put the interview into the NLP magazine, and everyone will hear about it, and then they'll all come on the training. Doesn't really work like that. We'll explore that perhaps in a moment or two. But I did end up at the NLP conference interviewing David Grove. He put me in his whirligig and was using me as a demonstration subject to show the whirligig to Wyatt Woodsmore outside the NLP conference in Regent's Park in London in the dark in the winter. It was fascinating. It was also deeply scary, but you can read about that. If you can look it up, that article's still online somewhere. It's on my website and a couple of other places.
Is that still the same whirligig that's at Caitlin and Sean's house now, or is that
I think
by their own?
No, it's either the same one or the one that's at Caitlin's house was certainly previously owned by David. Wow. I know there were 2 or 3 whirligigs in existence at various times, and I don't know which was which. And at least one of them was crashed into the parking barrier at Regent's College at one.
That sounds like a good story.
I feel like we need to add a picture of the whirligig for those that have never seen it. I'm not sure we'll get one with it crashed into the
I don't think a photograph exists of it crashing into the barrier.
Hopefully no police are watching this.
But interviewing David, I mean, you'll read, if you read that article, interviewing David is not like interviewing anybody else that I've ever had to interview. You just couldn't tie him down. You couldn't make him stand still. He was constantly moving. You couldn't sit him down to do something. He'd just be off and be expecting you to follow him. I'd never seen that kind of behavior, and I've interviewed plenty of celebrities and pop stars and politicians. It was from a journalistic point of view, prima donna. I'd have nothing to do with this. If it wasn't essentially critical to my business, I'd have knocked it on the head.
Wow.
And he was extremely rude, outrageously rude.
Wow. Where do you think that came from?
I don't know. As I say, I don't know him well, but it continued during this 2-day training. He was incredibly rude and dismissive. to the people who, to a lot of people, to be honest. But I don't think I'm told he didn't intend to be rude, but it was just, the meaning I made from it was that he was incredibly rude and very thoughtless. He was completely unaware of the impact of some of the things he was asking for. And I suppose, knowing what I know now and having heard a bit from Caitlin, I assume that he expected everybody else to be able to say, oh, when you, the night before the training, announced that you're going to need 2 dressmakers mannequins, he expects you to say, no, I'm not going to do that. It's not actually possible to get 2 dressmakers mannequins in London at less than 24 hours notice when you only announced after closing time the night before. No, we're not going to do that. We're not, but that wasn't how either myself or Wendy were at that time. We got on the phones. We didn't get the mannequins.
So that expression of needs, right, that comes out in clean language work, and especially Caitlin's work with systemic modelling, I can see where that kind of resonated from. Like being able to kind of need and say what you need and expect other people to be able to do the same as that.
That's the way I interpret it, but of course others may have very different.
Oh yeah.
Right.
And that's part of the beauty of clean language, right?
Yeah. How interesting that you still remain passionate about clean language after meeting its creator and having a pretty negative experience. I guess you still felt like there was, Yeah,
I think the work speaks for itself. Caitlin and many other people loved David Grove, thought he was a wonderful man, and my experience takes nothing from that. The fact is that his work was absolutely phenomenal. The insight that went into what he did, the connection between a number of what at that time were extremely disparate elements, that a lot more people have got the elements lined up nowadays. So when new people, for example, from the agile world, come across clean language and they say, oh, but that's the same as that, and that's the same as that, and that's the same as that, and that's the same as that, they think, well, why is clean language surprising? But what was really surprising was that David's creative mind was able to connect those things at a time when each of those things was right on the leading edge of thinking. And he saw the connections, put those connections together, and then went, right, let's do this.
Wow.
And did sufficient to essentially found a community and lead a community to help him refine and develop the work.
Fascinating. I was just thinking, quite a lot of our viewers kind of do agile coaching, but also clean language coaching, systemic modeling, clean language training. And you've got this insight from being someone's marketing expert in clean language. So what's some of the secrets, Judy, that we can all take on board when trying to market clean language?
Well, one of the most interesting things I think about clean language is how you can use it in actually selling something. Now, this is not marketing. Separate out the thought of marketing, but first think about the thought of selling something. Now, we in Rees McCann and in various other contexts, I've done this. I use clean language to find, when I'm in a one-on-one or in a small meeting conversation, to find out what people actually want. So you're modeling their desired outcome in the context of the conversation. You find out what they actually want, and then you get to say, oh, I can help you with that. Or you get to say, no, that's not something I can help you with. I'll refer you. Now, when people are properly listened to in a sales conversation like that, if you've done a lot of clean language stuff, you know that when people are asked clean questions, they typically feel very closely listened to, and they tend to trust the questioner. It's a trick, but it works. The questioner becomes a trusted friend and advocate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you're in a position of selling something, of course, being a trusted friend and advocate is quite an advantage. So that's sort of using a few clean language questions, not a deep and not a huge change process, not necessarily getting into much in the way of metaphor, but a few clean language questions well placed in a sales conversation can make a really big difference. So that's sales. Now expand that out to marketing, which is the process of contextualizing what you're selling. Marketing, when it's contextualizing, is about saying to the world, what I've got for you is like this, and it's not like that.
Mm.
It's for people like this, and it's not for people like that. So that is the process of marketing. So the tangle that certainly Wendy and I went through, and a whole bunch of people went through a similar period, was that they thought that clean language had to be marketed using clean language.
Mm-hmm.
As in, you had to try not to use metaphor in your marketing.
Mm.
Now, that throws marketing for a Fruit Loop. Because it is almost impossible to say our product or service is like this and it's not like that. Our ideal client is this, like this, not like that, without using metaphor. Almost by definition, it's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So I think emerging from that reality tunnel was a huge relief. And actually understanding that when we're marketing, whatever we're marketing, we need to make those comparisons, have that metaphorical standing, and also to focus in particular not on clean language, but on the benefits of clean language for that person.
Mm.
So hardly anyone is shopping for clean language. They might, for example, in the case of an agile coach, be shopping for some really useful tools to use in context A, context B, or context C, because they feel they get themselves into a bit of a tangle in those situations. So then the trick is to say, well, clean language can help you in context A, B, and C.
Yeah.
It's a bit like that wonderfully successful tool that you use in context D, but this tool you can use in context A.
Okay.
Can
you give us an example with reason we can, maybe? Like, what do you like and what do you not like? That way people can get familiar with your business and we get an example.
I didn't say I was any good at this in relation to
Fair. Let's take your latest initiative then. So, the hybrid work that you're currently doing. So, in the marketplace, people see that as not. Oh, Judy's not doing clean anymore. She's doing hybrid. And
so
before that, you were doing online remote, and then before that, you were doing agile.
Yeah. So the work that we've been doing all the way through the lockdown period of COVID has been basically about online. How might you run workshops and highly engaging, highly participative events online? Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I'm saying what we do is like helping you to do facilitation with lots of post-it notes and felt tips and smells and sounds and all that. It's like that, but take that online. And now I'm saying we can do all of that, and now we can do it in a hybrid context where some people are online and some people are in the room together. So the effect will be that you've got the in the room people with all their post-it notes, their sights, their sounds, their smells of coffee, the noise, the hubbub, all clustered around a board. And you're going to have an online group who have got lots going on and they've got social connections and they're talking to each other and they're bouncing ideas off each other. and really engaged with each other. And where relevant, we can figure out ways of connecting those two groups.
And how does Clean help you with that then?
Well, there are a bunch of ways that Clean helps me with that. The main one is Clean's understanding of the spatial nature of thought, the where question. If you use the where is question enough, you know that people hold their thoughts, typically their metaphors and symbols, in or around their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that does something to the way that people relate to each other in the room. So in a Clean setup of a symbolic modeling conversation, where would you like me to be,
mm-hmm.
has relevance. People feel differently about people being physically around them. Now, just knowing that, going into a conversation about how do we do this stuff online, changes the way you think. So we can, in this conversation, we're much closer to each other than we would be in the room. We're face
mm-hmm.
on to each other rather than being able to stand side by side.
Mm-hmm.
All those kinds of things that in the room, as Clean practitioners, we have awareness of. We can bring that awareness to the online environment and start to say, well, we can't yet walk around each other and do all that clever virtual reality stuff that maybe we'll be here in 10 years. Right now, we can just acknowledge that this is different, acknowledge that different people have different reactions to it, and help people to make themselves comfortable in this space. Alongside using all the various tools and things. But this stuff that to us as Clean practitioners would be obvious is really not obvious to a lot of people. So things like it makes a difference if people are able to pick up their own Sharpie and Post-it notes and manipulate these objects themselves. That's different experience from if you pick up these Post-it notes and Sharpies and you use them. That's not the same. But an awful lot of people who make products, the murals, the Miros, all of that kind of online whiteboard, they think, oh, well, it's fine if the facilitator does the moving. That'll be okay. But it's different.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it. It's just different.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because that's the number one thing that I give feedback to people on. So I run an expert program for agile coaching, and facilitation is one of the modules. It's like, just be careful who's doing the work here. Like, it's really important that as a facilitator, you're basically doing as little as possible. You're neutral, you're in that position, and you get in the group to experience and do the work. And I've never really related that to being specifically something that we pick up or take for granted as a Clean practitioner. So thank you for that.
I think it's one of those things that is just automatic as a Clean practitioner. And like so many of the ideas in Clean, other people do similar things. It's not unique and different. There are lots of people out there who, when in the room facilitating, if a Post-it note falls from the whiteboard, they don't dive in as the facilitator and put it back. That doesn't require a Clean sensibility, but it is part of what a Clean sensibility gives you.
Wow. Cool. So what's next for you then, Judy?
That's a good question, but so bunches. So I get really interested in embodied cognition and the relationship between embodied cognition and online and hybrid gathering of people. And how I'm not one of those people who likes to think themselves forward 20 years and imagine what it would be like if we had the virtual reality tools. I'm always passionate about, well, what can we do right now to use the tools we've got to make this stuff interesting and useful? So the reason I got into online training, facilitation and whatnot was because particularly after Wendy and I went our separate ways, I was trying to find a way to make a living. I wanted to teach clean language, but I couldn't for the life of me gather a group together in London. It was too expensive for people to travel for something which was pretty peripheral to their tool set. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to learn how to teach it online. At that time, we were teaching using Google Hangouts, or sometimes we'd do stuff on Skype and these kind of things. And this was in a time when people said it can't be done. It really can't be done. So now one of the things that all of the people involved in online gatherings have said since way before the pandemic is that hybrid gathering is much, much harder than either fully remote or fully in the room. Essentially, if you're setting up a gathering of those three, if you're setting up a gathering that involves people in the room, remote people, and the connection between the two, you've got 3 designs to do. You've got a design for in the room, you've got a design for remote, and then you've got to figure out the connection.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about how we can best use the tools we have, and the tools we can easily get hold of, to facilitate the connecting bit. And I'm doing that with an awareness of some of the brilliant research that is now coming out. Embodied cognition research had a bit of a setback, you may know. It's probably about 10 years. No, it's not as long as 10 years. But there was a really a series of unfortunate incidents in the world of embodied cognition, which set it back quite significantly. And you can look that up. But it's now rebounding. People are understanding that you can study the effect of physical behaviors on thought and the effect of thought on physical behaviors, and discover things that are universal and things that are uniquely individual. And we can where we can keep track of all this research, because there's huge amounts of it, we can use those insights to help us to understand how best to use the tools to connect the online and the in the room. That's rather a long spiel, but I hope it made some kind of sense.
Sounds fascinating. I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of that, because I know I'm just starting to go back into the office now and work with clients where some people are at home, and even with my clean skills, it still feels really hard and suboptimal, and so I'm still experimenting.
It is hard.
Yeah.
And it is hard. And one of the clients I've been working with recently is an organization which is, well, it's not known for its flexibility. And one of the trainings I've been doing is with their directors, or some of their directors, just basically helping them to understand how one might have difficult conversations, like conversations about who's going to return to the office when and why, how you might have those conversations remotely, fully, when people aren't going to be all in, you're not actually going to get everybody in the room together to have the conversation about whether you can get in the room together.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of the interesting stuff about that includes the fact that it's not all going to be in meetings. It's not going to be in live gatherings. An awful lot of that conversation online happens asynchronously, where people are not all online together at the same time. Way back when I was first exploring clean language, I remember we were playing with asynchronous clean language coaching. What would happen if you, during the course of with the experiment I did with a guy called Adam Sargent, was during the course of a working day, I will send you the occasional question, you'll send back your answer, and we won't put a fixed time on it, but during the course of the day, you'll do a full coaching session. And that was really interesting because, of course, in between the questions and the answers, life was occurring. Right. And meaning making was then occurring. And I had to model what was happening, even when I had no information about what was happening, which forces you to stay even cleaner, I think. You can't
less context.
Yeah, so you don't have the context, so you have to stay clean, work out what are some of the possible things that could be happening, and then ask an even cleaner question if you can. So hanging on to, if you like, the structures, and things like Penny and James's framework for change, and really thinking, you know, that answer, was that problem, remedy, or outcome?
Mm-hmm.
In which case, what kind of questions should I respond with? And in noticing those written, in this case, written answers, what's the tone of that answer? Is the tone problem, remedy, or outcome? And actually working out how in writing you can match tone is something that we might want to consider.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that.
And there's a really interesting book by a guy called, a woman called Erica Darwan, called Digital Body Language. Now, I use the term digital body language to mean what happens when you're sitting in a square of Zoom. But what she means is how your writing comes across in email and in using Slack or WhatsApp.
Mm-hmm.
And she also talks about the, you know, cultural differences and generational differences and even gender differences between the way people write. Now, as clean practitioners, we can quickly get our heads around that kind of notion. People are different. There are subtle differences. The subtle differences indicate differences in the way they are experiencing the world, the way they're thinking about it, the way they're feeling about it. And as we devise our next question, we match tone by matching words and matching speeds and a whole bunch of other things that doesn't involve staring into people's eyes. That's the other advantage of being a clean practitioner in the online world, is you're used to not looking into people's eyes. You wouldn't believe how hung up people get about staring into each other's eyes, or the fact they can't. And as clean practitioners, we know that actually breaking eye contact can be really, really useful an awful lot of the time.
So many nuances I'd never even thought about. Fascinating.
Yeah, I'm kind of speechless right now. And that doesn't happen very often.
So let me ask a question then. So amongst all the stuff that I've just said, is there one thing that could be useful to you, Sarah?
I'm definitely thinking about tone in written language, because my team's all distributed and we talk all day via our, chat client at work, and to think about people's tone and then like the embodiment of the words that they're typing. I never even really thought about it other than my interpretation of what they typed, so to think about it at those multiple levels, which clean does for me, is it takes these little things and then it, blows them up and zooms in and flies all around. So you see things from different angles. So it's just like applying that to text is totally a new idea. So thank you for that.
Oh, in that, I think it's in the Erica Darwan book, there's a whole thing about how, no, it's not. It's a book called Because Internet. There's a whole thing about how GIFs and emojis and that kind of stuff are actually a replacement for body language. Both intentional, obvious gesture, but also the repetitive gestures that people make without even thinking about it. And you can map the kind of repeat emoji thing that a lot of people do onto some of the gestural emphases that people make.
Oh, wow.
So you could ask a clean question like, is there anything else about heart, 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 tick, tick, tick?
Yeah.
Makes so much sense. I'm such an emoji person, and I also talk with my hands, so I bet it's totally the same thing.
It's one of the reasons why I'm starting to move a little bit away from Zoom, because the restriction in the chat there's not that rich kind of GIF format and things like that you get in Microsoft Teams, for example. And I'm using Microsoft Teams with my client. It's like, we'll just do like a GIF check-in, or what animal are you right now, or any of those things that we might do. Your elephant is like what, and you can see what different elephant GIFs people come up with. And then sometimes I forget and I do it in Zoom. It's like, we can't. Damn.
I love that. It's a really nice idea that I've never thought of, because I hardly ever work in Teams. But it's, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You use the tools you've got. Yeah. Don't sit around dreaming about the tools you wish you had.
Which is so easy to do, right? I think my big reflection was thinking of the hybrid world in not just the context of that one meeting or session you're doing, but as kind of a whole infrastructure with your whole comms that you're building in. Because we're doing a lot of work with that with my current client and how they use Teams in very different ways, and use kind of videos to interact and engage. And we do some stuff where people are in the office and online, but a lot of the information is also supported additionally, and I didn't really see that as the same thing. So that's got me dreaming up now, kind of what's possible when you take the fixed context of, it's a bit like the old exercise that some of you might have been done, where it's like put the candle on the wall and it's in the cardboard tray, and because it's in the cardboard tray, you don't see it. I'll probably spoil it for anyone who's going to play that game in the future. But the idea is that it's there, so you should use it.
I've got to tell you about a really lovely piece of utilization by a student on a training. He was actually the same director training recently. We got them to do some pre-work, create a user guide to me, user manual for me. We set them some previous questions, some specific questions, what times of day do you like to work, that kind of stuff. And the challenge option was to create a 1-minute video of your answers, because these were people who never use video, apart from they use video in meetings, but never record video. Anyway, one of these guys got really creative, and instead of putting himself on the video camera, he created a video of an IKEA style manual for him.
Oh, that's so cool.
Nice. It was called How to Use Your Johnny. His name was Johnny, and something like that. It was basically how to
use your Johnny.
Most unfortunate, but the Americans are going, what? Anyway, he created this lovely user manual using these IKEA diagrams and that kind of thing. And this is not a highly creative organization. This is not a place where you expect people to come up with really brilliant and innovative ideas and spend their weekends creating silly videos. But people do when it catches their attention, and it brings joy. So, and if you've done clean work where you get people to draw things on Post-it notes, and the first time it was, but I can't draw. I remember being asked the first time in Wendy's trainings to draw stuff on sheets of A4 paper with piles of coloured pens. I'm going, I can't draw. I don't know how to make anything with this. Well, what we're now giving people is a huge palette of multimedia tools at their tips of their fingers, just on their phones. They can do amazing things. But yeah, so there's a sort of structure, there's a thing from Clean about how constraint inspires creativity. That phrase actually comes from the Twitter rules. They don't exist anymore, those rules. But Twitter used to say constraint inspires creativity. One of the things I love about Clean is how the constraint of the Clean language questions inspires you to use them creatively. It frees up your mind to pay attention to the other person. Martin Burns wrote a really excellent, the late Martin, scarily number. I find myself saying the late far too often at the moment. The late Martin Burns wrote a really excellent article in which he talked about how, as an agile coach, being able to forget all the clever questions he might ask or all the advice he might give, push that out of his awareness, and instead focus on the other person or the other people and just ask another question. It was hugely mentally liberating.
That level of attention that you pay someone else feels very different.
Is there any final things that you want to share with us, Judy, before we say goodbye to our viewers?
If you go to reesmccann.com, find the place where you can sign up for my link letter, which goes out every week to about 4,000 thereabouts people. It always includes some stuff about the world of clean language and stuff about the world of embodied cognition and stuff about the world of online and hybrid events. It's always interesting. People email me and say it's the best link letter they get all week. So I recommend it.
Awesome. And we'll make sure we put a link to that in the description of this episode. So it's nice to reconnect after some time away, but for now it's goodbye.
Yeah. Remember to subscribe. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like and subscribe. I always forget that bit.